Good evening, everybody. My name is Nick E. Smith, and I'm pleased to serve as First Deputy Public Advocate for the City of New York, along with, of course, our city's Public Advocate, Jimani D. Williams. We want to thank you all for tuning into this, what I think will be a really fantastic discussion about diversity in the legal profession and breaking down barriers to get into the profession that folks here are either in or getting into. I myself, just so folks are aware, I'm a graduate of St. John's University School of Law, Go Red Storm. Again, we're here today to discuss the barriers for entry for marginalized communities that we face in relation to law school and becoming attorneys. We want to question why there are not as many people of color who are lawyers compared to their white counterparts. Why are there not as many women lawyers compared to their male counterparts? Let's discuss what we can do to address some of those barriers. Before we jump into it, I want to thank our team members in the Public Advocate's Office who helped put this together, including Brian Polanco, Jaleesa Santiago, Chanel Mellish, and Isabella Sadej. Without further ado, I want to take a minute for each panelist that's agreed to join us to introduce themselves briefly, and then we'll go into some questions. And why don't we start with Lurie?
Hello, good evening. My name is Lurie Daniel Favors. I'm very excited to be here. I think this is a conversation that is as relevant, if not more so now than it was when I was applying to law school. I am currently serving as the interim executive director at the Center for Law and Social Justice at Medgar Evers College, and I practice what I call racial justice law. So we are a law center, and I am a lawyer who focuses on how to use the law to empower communities of African descent. And at the center, we do so with a specific focus on New Yorkers from the Pan-African diaspora in the city of New York. So I'm very excited for this conversation, and I thank you all for organizing and hosting it.
Thank you so much, Lurie. Let's go to our colleague in government, State Senator Luis Sepulveda. Senator, welcome.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you so much. I want to thank the Public Advocate who's been doing a great job presenting these Zoom webinars about a lot of topics, not just the law. And we have to give credit where credit is due. So thank you for the work that you do. I'm sort of like the senior member of the circuit. I graduated from law school in 1991, entered law school in 1988. And from the moment I got there, I realized how very few people of color were in law school. I went to Hofstra University Law School and started a fight. Someone of Latino descent or African American descent as professors, because we had no Latinos in the entire school. And since becoming a legislator, it's been part of my mission to diversify the judiciary. The head of the Senate, Senator Stewart Cousins, calls me her diversity person because we insisted on establishing what's called a subcommittee on judicial diversity for New York State. And my objective is to make sure that we diversify both communities of color, gender, what the courtrooms look like, and what our legal profession looks like. It's been very slow to become more reflective of the population of the state. And there are many reasons for that, which I'm sure we'll discuss today. So I won't take any more time because we want to get to the substance, but certainly everyone here has one mission in mind, and that's to make sure that we diversify and provide opportunities to communities of colors to join the legal profession. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator. And again, thank you for joining. Let's go to someone who may have taken a final exam today, I think. Ariana Collado, Chief of Staff to our council member. Ariana, feel free.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. And thank you so much for having me. I am honored to be on a panel with so many distinguished attorneys. My name is Ariana Collado, and I am Councilmember Cohen's Chief of Staff. As a more recent entrant into the profession, I hope that my experience as a current law student will help provide some insight on today's topic. But as the oldest daughter in an immigrant household, I often joke that I've been a family lawyer since I was 8 and I could read and write. So thank you, and I'm really excited to have this conversation.
Thank you, Ariana. And we always say last but not least, certainly not so, our colleague from the Law Department of the City of New York, Ryan Nasim. Ryan?
Thank you, Nick, and thank you everyone for inviting me onto this panel. I'm very excited to be having this discussion, which I also think is very relevant in our times. I went to John Jay College of Criminal Justice for my bachelor's, graduated in 2012. I went to Toro Law in Central Islip, New York, graduated in 2016. Since then, I've been working as an assistant corporation counsel for the New York City Law Department. And in that capacity, I worked in the tort division where I represented NYPD against false arrests and excessive force cases. Then I became a prosecutor in family court working on juvenile delinquency. And I'm currently in the labor and employment litigation division.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So as you all can tell, this is a really powerful panel, and we'll jump right into the questions. And at the end, if there's time, we'll take any questions we get from, I think, Facebook Live on the back end. And we'll start the first question with Lurie, who may have to jump off a little early. And the first question is a bit of a broad one, but once Lurie answers, anyone can jump in. So here's the first set of questions. Quite simply, why are there not as many people of color and women and folks from other diverse representations in the legal profession? A broad question, but curious to hear your take, Lurie.
You know, it's funny. I was just telling someone when I was at Penn State and I went to go meet with my pre-law advisor for the very first time. It was a walk-in student. So she didn't have any information about me, didn't know my grades or anything like that. And I asked her about the law school application process. And she literally told me, well, you know, affirmative action is not going to be around anymore by the time you're applying for law school. This is like in the late 90s. People are literally fighting it right now. So, you know, you should really consider third and fourth tier law schools because you'll have a realistic shot of getting in. And I'd already done enough homework by that point to know that what she was telling me did not make a whole lot of sense. But the reality is, had I not known that, had I not had other people that I could go to who would encourage me, I might have thought that I was not capable of many of the things that I ended up being able to accomplish. I think the barriers to entry are so sufficiently high for people of color. One, just to get to college, if you are able to do so coming from communities like many of ours, you are already a miracle story. If you're able to then get through the process of applying to law school, take the LSAT, which I contend to this day is useless, but that's just me, study hard, pass it. But if you're able to get to take an LSAT, if you're able to pay the thousands plus dollars, at least, you know, that's what it was when I was trying to get in, to the programs and the tutoring programs that can prepare you, if you're able to get all of those things together, then great, you might do well. But if you're competing with people whose parents and grandparents were lawyers, who made partner when you were going into kindergarten, and whose dinner conversation every night is about, you know, the deposition you just took, or the cross-examination you engaged in, or the deal you just put together, you might go through your entire life under those circumstances with the expectation that of course you would go to law school the same way you expected to go to first grade after kindergarten. And so when the barriers to entry are such as they are, when systemic racism is built into really discouraging people of color, and then you have the cost of having to be able to afford it. I was very privileged because I was able to, I got a public interest scholarship to NYU. I could not afford to go to NYU law school at all. And so if you don't have access to those just very basic fundamental things, it is that much more difficult. So shout out to you, Ariana, for finishing, for taking that last exam today, and best of luck to you. But we just have to be very clear. There are just a lot of practical barriers that exist that are really preventative for a number of people who would be where I'm sitting right now. I went to high school with a whole lot of people who would be great lawyers, but they just didn't get the lucky breaks that I may have gotten. So I think that has a lot to do with it.
I love that. And you hit on a bunch of core points. And I think the initial topic for me there is access. And there seems to be like a real, unfortunately, tracking system that kind of sends some folks on a, we're not going to go because of money, or, you know, with the first in our family to go to college and those issues, versus those who have a built-in advantage. And you mentioned affirmative action. And I think that's a great initial framing. Curious to hear anyone else's thoughts. Senator, you have anything, or Ryan or Ariana?
Sure. So, you know, what she talked about is something that I faced 30 years ago when I was going through the process of applying for law school. There is an undeniable systemic racism within the schools themselves. You didn't have programs when I was there that actually recruited people of color going through schools and communities that represent large swaths of people of color. There was no concerted effort by the law schools because, you know, just like many professions, for example, the fire department, which seems to have a large Irish population, and the NYPD at one point, although now it's more minority prevalent. but we didn't have this experience within our families of people that were lawyers. And when you had the high school counselors, same thing that Lurie went through. I had a high school counselor who told me that I should consider a trade school, being a mechanic, even though I was one of the top 5 students in the entire school. So the racism was much more obvious and prevalent than it is now, although it still exists to a great degree here. And you look at also, we as elected officials, as legislators, we have to make sure that we remove some of the costs involved in applying for law school. I was what they call a Clio fellow. It was a scholarship they gave me for 4 years. I don't even know if that exists anymore, but the number of programs, certainly under this current administration, thank God it's over soon, but the number of programs that funded opportunities for people of color to go to law school were minimal. And today I think they're even more scarce. So cost is certainly a major issue. Undeniable systemic racism in the application process. You know, I'll tell you a story that a law school president told me about a father, a very wealthy donor who was always wailing against affirmative action, or what they call affirmative action, and was vehemently opposed to it. His kid was a subpar student, and he called the head of the law school because he wanted his kid to get in because he was paying for it. So, you know, the hypocrisy has always been palpable when it comes to communities of color and our access to law schools, but that's got to change. And I have seen some changes. It's still very, very difficult, and that's something that we as people of color consider a career, just like the medical profession. But that's got to change. I see some changes, certainly within women of color. They are applying to law schools at greater numbers than men of color. And that's a good sign, because I believe that women make better judges and better lawyers than men do. But this is something that we have to stay on top of. And, you know, it's telling that for many years, I was the only legislator of color that was an attorney in the New York State legislature. I got elected the first time in 2011. And fast forward today, almost 10 years later, and there are only 2 of us. And one of them just got here, and that's Catalina Cruz. So there are only 2 attorneys in the entire state legislature of 213 people that are of color, that are representing communities in the legislature. So we have a lot of work to do, and we have to do it because a diverse judiciary, a diverse legal profession is a much better profession for all of us. Thank you.
Agree, Senator. Thank you so much for that. Ariana, you have anything to add then, right?
I guess as a recent, I applied to law school just a few years ago, and as somebody who hasn't been able to depend on their parents financially since I was 17, I did all of the research on my own, having to pay for the LSAT exam, which is $200. Application fees, and some schools do give fee waivers, but a lot don't. And that is another $65 per application, and that adds up. And then, as Lurie mentioned, the LSAT prep. I went with the cheapest route I can think of, and it was a course where I paid initially $200, and then it was an additional $200 a month. And what I did was that I used it for a certain number of times. I was able to pause it because I could not rely on my parents to give me $2,000 or $3,000 for an LSAT prep program. So that's definitely an obstacle. It's definitely a barrier. And I guess one of the most important things is that representation matters. I only grew up seeing white lawyers on TV or in the field. So the idea of actually being able to be part of that field, it really did feel like a far-fetched dream. And sometimes I'm in school and I'm thinking about it. I'm like, am I really going to do this? And I look at other women of color to tell me that, yes, I can and I will.
So I've listened to everyone pretty much hit on all of the topics that I was going to speak on. But, you know, as I listened to Senator Sepulveda, who graduated law school 30 years ago, and as myself, who graduated law school 4 years ago, it doesn't sound like there's been much progress or change, right? I think and I'm speaking from my own experience, for me, I didn't have any exposure to any lawyers growing up like other people of color. My parents are immigrants from the Caribbean. And when I brought up the idea of going to law school, yes, they were encouraging, but they were afraid. and they were afraid of the mountain of debt that I would possibly incur. They were afraid of maybe my inability to pass or compete with my white counterparts, or my ability to get a job, or how would the public perceive an attorney of color or a gay attorney of color at that. So there was not much resources that I had, and I came from a public school in South Jamaica, Queens, where we didn't have career days. And I remember when I was in college, I spoke to my pre-law advisor at the time, and I had a very high GPA. Academically, I was performing well. I had got into the pre-law boot camp, and the word she told me was, I may not possess the moral capacity to become a lawyer. And I chose a lower tier school. The reality of the situation, why, is because it was never my intention to become a big corporate lawyer, make six figures fresh out of law school. I wanted to be a public defender. I wanted to be a criminal defense attorney. I wanted to work in public interest law. So that wasn't my route. But I also made the decision based on financials, based off of the fact of what school is going to give me the most amount of money I'm going to go to. And that's why, I mean, Toro, it's a lower ranked school, but it has a high minority student population. And I think that majority of the students chose that school or other lower tier schools for the same reason, because it's what we could afford at the time. And I think that the progress that we have to make going forward is to encourage others, or more outreach to these communities, the low socioeconomic communities, the communities of color, to show them like, hey, I was once where you are, and we can make it, and you can be here too.
Yeah, thank you all for that. I mean, and I think what's clear from all of the introductory comments is that, as I think Ryan said, it's been 30 years since the senator was in law school, and there's not been much structural change to increase access, whether it's tutoring or funds for the application fees, which, by the way, I know is a barrier. Worrying about taking the LSAT and what scores make sense, and then so there's so many barriers. Let's do a quick hypothetical, actually. Let's say you are speaking to an 8th grader. What is that, age 13, 14? And they're thinking, hey, I'm interested in law. I don't know what yet. I keep hearing about criminal law. And let's say they talk to a couple of you, let's say Lurie and Senator Sepulveda, or any of you. Hey, I'm interested in law school. I'm going into 9th grade. What should I be thinking about? And how would you advise me in terms of making that choice?
Well, I think one of the dying skills that we have that you will learn it when you're in law school that is extremely necessary is our ability to write well. Many of our students go into law school writing at an 8th grade level. So that's a skill that is a must and will open other doors that you could never imagine. So my words of encouragement would be is make sure that you improve how you write. Secondly is I would encourage them. Of course, you have to take all your classes and do as well as you can. But I would encourage some of these kids to consider doing internships. There shouldn't be a thought process immediately of our kids that we want to become criminal lawyers, right? Why can't these kids think, I want to go work in Wall Street? There's nothing wrong with that. Or I want to work in government. Or I want to practice, for many years, I had a community-based practice in the Bronx. And then I got elected to the legislature. I still practice, but if my son wants to go to law school, and he may, I tell him, don't limit yourself to just criminal law. Go in all aspects. There's so many different things you can do with a law degree that you don't have to limit yourself to that. But first and foremost, you have to excel academically, excel your writing skills, and that way you become a much more sellable candidate for any law school. And you can get access to a lot of the scholarships that may or may not be available by the time these 8th graders are going to law school. But if you have the academic preparation, if you need tutoring, whatever it is, but if your numbers are exemplary, no one can stop you, and you will get offers from many, many schools, including tuition, free tuition. So bone up on your skills, don't give up, bone up on those skills, and become the best writers that you can become.
I think I would echo everything the senator said. And really would stress the writing. I went to law school with some brilliant people. I went to law school with some folks, you know. But if you can write well, your intelligence, your innate intelligence almost becomes a secondary skill set if you can write well. And you know, that's really a challenge when you're considering the state of a number of the elementary, middle school, and high schools that a lot of our children are coming out of. And so I think that that's really important. I would also want to just highlight the idea that typically when I'm talking to young people about law school, the first thing they think about, as you said, Senator, is I want to be a criminal defense attorney, or someone in my family was negatively impacted by the criminal justice system or is currently justice involved, and I want to be, you know, active, which is phenomenal. I would say, however, that we tend to see, while lawyers of color are not at all overly represented within the profession, within the criminal defense bar, we do tend to see an abundance of attorneys gravitate to that space who are attorneys of color. And when I finished law school, I actually, I took a job at a law firm here in the city. And for me, it was really about a couple of things. One, I had been poor my whole life, and I needed to pay off student loans. And my husband and I wanted to buy a house, and we wanted to fund our nonprofit because I was still pretending that I was not a corporate lawyer and you know, doing my nonprofit organizing work on the side. And I learned so much from that space that is still applicable to my community activism and organizing today. So I would also encourage them to not be pigeonholed into any particular subset of law. I would encourage them, you know, well, after COVID, go sit in a courtroom, and not just a criminal defense attorney, a criminal courtroom or a courtroom for a judge who tends to be in the criminal justice bar. Go into civil court, go into the federal courts, go into the bankruptcy court. They're all right there. If you're in Brooklyn, Cadman Plaza is right there. If you're in Manhattan, you know, Pearl Street is right there. You can go into these spaces. You can hear what's happening. You can observe cases. If you see a high profile case in the news, go to the trial. You can participate. You can be a part of it and really get exposure that I think a lot of us don't know is there to take advantage of. And I am being pinged with a text message that is reminding me to say that the senator has been also joined by Assemblymember Latrice Walker and State Senator Zelnor Myrie, who are also members of the bar. So the numbers are not great, but there are at least 2 additional members of the bar who are also serving in the state legislature as well. But I think all of those things are important for people to know. Criminal justice, the criminal defense, the prosecution space where we need prosecutors of color, we need good people in those positions. That is a phenomenally powerful aspect of the legal system, but it's not the only areas where a law degree can be extraordinarily helpful. And so they should feel free to be able to explore all of it.
I agree. And I want to go to Ryan and Ariana on this, but you mentioned single member Walker, a really great example, of course, yourself too, Senator, of a legislator who's really using their legal skills in the movement of legislation. In fact, I know that she was the prime sponsor of the bail reform package, which there was some back and forth on that in terms of passing it and moving back a little bit. But that's an example.
Senator Myrie also had a big say at the Senate level of getting that passed. We were part of a committee that the leader sets up. So we have to give a lot of credit to Zelnor as well.
Absolutely. So we thank you all for that. And that's a great example for young folks that may be watching. You know, you can, again, as the folks here said, you can use that degree in so many areas. Like myself, perfect example. I took my law degree and literally used the skills that I learned, for example, in con law in the drafting of legislation. So we can speak to the Fair Chance Act, ban the box. We can speak to so many human rights centered laws that we've been able to do based on some of that legal work. Ryan or Ariana, you want to jump in on that as well?
Yeah, the one thing I would probably add or echo is that there are so many opportunities for internships, and I'm only saying government because that's been my exposure for high school students that may not be accessible or aware to them in their schools if they attend maybe a public inner city school. But I know specifically my office, the New York City Law Department, every summer we usually have high school students come and they intern with our office. They conduct a mock trial. And it's great. They get exposure to the law. They get to observe cases in court. They get to follow the attorneys around and maybe even attend a deposition or two. And I know the DA's offices also provide internships for high school students as well. So along with what the Senator and Lurie had to say, I would just add that.
And I guess just to add, before we forget, Senator Jamal Bailey is also a lawyer, and he graduated from CUNY Law, so I can't forget him. But I would also, I guess, tell 8th graders to echo what everybody said, definitely the writing skills. We've had instances where I'm looking at resumes and they may not have the experience I need, but if they have a very strong writing sample, it definitely does stand out. And I know it's difficult sometimes for us to, as when I was in high school, I went to a great school, thankfully, but I still didn't know if I wanted to do an internship, where I would be able to do that. So I think it's important also that we reach out to these schools in across the borough and across the city, and let our students know that there are internships in government, and also that they don't have to be they don't have to be a court-facing lawyer. There's a lot of opportunities at the city council that I'm aware of that it's to do research, and before you create any bill, you need to do a lot of research. So it's definitely as important.
Great. So let's shift just a little bit to some news from this year and the bar exam itself. So we talked a bit about access on the front end. Let's talk about some of the barriers to formally entering the legal profession, particularly during COVID-19. So we know that the bar exam went virtual, fully remote. There was a bunch of complications to taking the exam and potentially passing, including, by the way, disability access, which we're doing a series on more largely starting tomorrow. But anyone can just jump in on this one. Talk to us about, what you've heard about the bar exam this year, diploma privilege, and that whole sort of issue set in the news. Anyone can take this one.
I guess I'll go first, just because since I'm still in law school, I have heard a lot of complaints from friends and upperclassmen who struggled with this. So we know that when you're ready to study for the bar, people usually quit their jobs. They spend 3 months just studying, not receiving any income to hopefully pass the bar and start their job. So if you've been studying for 3 months and 3 days before they tell you that it's been postponed, it's a hardship, and it creates a ripple effect on law students who are already facing struggles with studying for the bar on top of a global pandemic. Also, I have a lot of thoughts on the bar exam, but in short, the bar exam, in my opinion, it doesn't test for competency. It just tests law school graduates on how well they're able to memorize material after studying for 3 months nonstop. So there's definitely changes that need to be made. I feel for those students. I know other states have definitely instituted diploma privilege or provisional licensing. So I'm hoping we're able to get to some kind of compromise where it would be helpful for the recent grads.
Yeah, just like Lurie said that the LSATs have absolutely no connection to law school. I don't really see how the bar exam had any connection to what I've been doing, and certainly to many lawyers. I see the bar exam as really an anti-competitive component of the legal profession. And the communities of color, we tend to have a lower passing rate. And I think there's a reason, because just like many other state exams, it is culturally biased. No doubt about it. I've reviewed it. When I was taking the bar exam, I looked at prior exams, and there's a cultural component that we cannot ignore. So my belief is that pursuant to Senator Holman's bill, that basically will allow people to practice without having to take the bar exam, I think under this current situation, that's where we should be. And so I'm all for waiving the bar exam so that people can practice under this current situation.
Got it. Ryan, you want to jump in?
Yes. My take with the bar exam is, I understand that some sort of test or examination may be required to determine whether or not someone possesses maybe the legal competency to practice law in the state of New York. That's fine. But my issue with the bar exam is it's not practical at all. Everything that you are faced with on the bar exam, you've already done in law school. So if you pass law school, more than likely you're going to pass the bar exam at some point, even if it takes you a little bit longer. But skills that you need to be a lawyer are not tested on the bar. It doesn't test you how to convey a deed. It doesn't test you how to conduct a closing, how to read a contract, how to negotiate terms, or do a merger and acquisition. Those are all transactional skills. If you're going to be a transactional lawyer, you may need to know. It doesn't test you about depositions. Maybe civil procedure may touch on it, but not necessarily about objections and what's proper and what's not. So after you pass the bar and you start practicing law, I mean, you're not really prepared. You have to learn by practice. So I mean, the bar exam is kind of ineffective in that sense. And I would be in favor for a diploma privilege as well.
The only thing I could possibly add to everything that has already rightly been said is that I think in addition to the diploma privilege, there has to be some work done on the culture within the profession. The levels of hierarchy that exist within the legal profession are obscene. And I say that as someone who, as a child, spent time living in a shelter and got my first check as a summer associate and almost passed out on the floor. And so there is a lot of snobbery, I think, within the profession. When you are at a law firm or at a nonprofit or wherever you may be, and those bar results come out, it is public. People will go online and they will look up the newly incoming crop of attorneys to see who passed and who didn't. Not having access to that or being able to have your name on that list, that may carry some sort of impact. And so I think that we need to talk about diploma privilege, and we also need to talk about breaking down some of the barriers and stereotypes within the profession that really serve as sort of gatekeepers to locking in, I guess I could call it a classism or type of legal industry classism that I think is really detrimental and is extraordinarily harmful for lawyers of color. And so I think that in addition to the mechanics of how you get to practice law, we should continue having conversations about breaking down a lot of the traditions that are within the legal profession that really only serve to keep it as white and male as possible.
And that's what I think the bar exam essentially does.
Exactly.
So there's no connection. And if you ask me, there are other ways of testing our abilities to practice law. The bar exam is not one of them.
Absolutely.
There seems to be unanimous agreement there, which is telling with this group. So I do have a question about non-traditional paths to this work, and I want folks to really hear more about what each of you are doing in your spaces. But before we get there, I want to talk about, let's say you are a law student. I know, Ariana, you are a law student. Let's talk about that culture in the classroom. I remember being in, I'll just be honest, criminal law. And, this goes into the application of what we're learning in the real world. And I recall asking the professor when the person discussed wrongful convictions on the criminal side, quite frankly, thanks for letting us know that that's a problem, but I think we should be talking about solutions as well in this classroom. And the answer I got back, and this is a quote, was, in terms of wrongful convictions, and as we know, there's disparate impacts on people of color, it happens. It happens, period. That was the answer I got as the law student as to how we could reduce wrongful convictions. And we know we have great groups out there doing work on this Innocence Project, a bunch of clinics and law schools. Talk about that. As a student of color, how do you begin to think about those barriers that are in the real world, like racism, classism, as Lurie and the senator talked about earlier? How do you address that as a law student, of course, going into to the bar itself?
So I guess I'll go first on this one. So I would like to say, I've heard experiences from other law students. I go to CUNY Law, and I would like to say that we are a social justice school. I think the professors have a different way of teaching the law and a different perspective. They show us a different perspective as maybe other law schools would not. But it's still difficult as a student of color, and I've had these conversations with other students of color as well, that we're not as comfortable as speaking our mind. We're not as comfortable as approaching the professor after class. There's a sense of, at least in my opinion, a sense of hierarchy, where we haven't been in these spaces before, and just we already are facing imposter syndrome a lot of times. So we're sitting in this room and we're thinking, do we actually deserve to be here? And then going to a professor after class to ask them to explain something, it kind of, it definitely works against you. But we're learning every single day. I think that we learn from each other, and we have a great support system at CUNY Law. So I'm definitely thankful for that.
You know, that's one of the reasons why for the 3 years I was in law school, I drove the administration crazy, is that, you know, we don't have people that look like us teaching us the law. I can tell you that I went through 4 years of, and I went to Hofstra Law School. I went through 4 years of college and 3 years of law school, and I don't ever recall having a professor of color, a Latino, African-American professor during that time period. I know there was one or two professors of African-American professors at the law school when I was there. By the time I left, there was only one left. But we don't see individuals that look like us teaching the law. So that's part of our need to say we can attain certain things. You don't have to, you know, we don't have to practice law. We don't have to, we can be a law professor, right? There's so many different things you can do. But when you are a student and you look like essentially one of maybe 3 or 4 Latinos or African Americans, it makes the experience much more difficult, and it makes it much more difficult for us to exert ourselves as a community. You know, I was the second president of the Latino Law Students Association at Hofstra University. Sally Mansonet, who's in the appellate division, was the founder, and we voiced our opinion about getting more Latinos or African Americans hired at the law school, so that we can have someone that we can, you know, associate with, someone that can share experiences with us. Unfortunately, never happened by the time I was there, and I still think that we don't have sufficient at my law school, and I'm sure that's the case throughout the country.
Got it. Thank you, Senator. Anyone else want to take that one? And then we'll go to another question. And Lurie's got to jump soon, so we want to make sure she has a minute to wrap her piece if she'd like. So Lurie, feel free if you have to.
No, I think they covered it. I could not add anything to what they said. I agree 100%.
Great. Okay, so here's another question, speaking to non-traditional paths once you were out of law school. And my path has been, I identified law school probably in the 9th or 10th grade as something that I was interested in. I definitely recognized that I would use the degree in policy making, which I'm fortunate to say I've been able to do for a few years now as a profession. And I know it requires a lot of persistence to really, you know, get that degree. And by the way, I'm not from New York originally. I'm from Los Angeles. So moving to New York, going to law school, adjusting to the culture of the city, and of course, the culture of the law school was a big challenge. But I think with persistence, I was able to, you know, meet some of those goals. I'm curious to know, in your individual experiences, how do you use that degree in your legal training in your current professions? And then what are some other roles or jobs that you think a prospective law student should be thinking about, particularly those of color, of course?
Well, I'll let Lurie go first because I know she has to leave soon.
Thank you so much. And I just want to say, before I say this and then get to my next Zoom, I very much have appreciated being able to share this Zoom stage with all of you. I have to be honest with you. I have not, I think that for me, one of the most powerful ways that I've been able to use my degree as an attorney has been in my communication with my own community, because the level of, oh, well, she's the Black lawyer. She works on race stuff. There's a default acceptance of what I'm saying, and an ability to sort of open doors and minimize barriers when I'm trying to organize our portions of our community to move towards a particular advocacy point. It is also interesting in that I think I've worked with people who are organizers, grassroots organizers, people who are in boardrooms, people who are teaching in clinics. A very good friend of mine, he went from being a federal defender to now running a law center, to being faculty. There are so many things that can be done with a legal degree. And at the same time, I will often ask people, well, what is it that you actually want to change? And is a law degree necessary in order to do that? A lot of times we often sort of default to thinking, well, I got to be a doctor, a lawyer, engineer, if you're sort of in the top three professions. And the reality is that, you know, there are a lot of things that can be done without the degree, but having that degree, being able to say that you put in the time to study, yes, but that you have sort of that intimate knowledge about the way the law came to represent what it does now, it is just helpful in a wide variety of spaces. And so I actually, at this point, don't know many people that I graduated law school with who are still practicing attorneys. So it's given me a lot of hope seeing some of y'all and hearing your stories. So just know that the degree itself opens doors. It can be very fluid. You are not pigeonholed into one particular space. As I mentioned, I went to a corporate law firm, which was like the least pro-Black thing that one might think of that you might do with a law degree. And yet I was able to use those connections and experiences to really help fuel where I'm at now, which is literally leading a racial justice law center. So I think that whatever people are passionate about, whatever issues you want to fight for, if the degree can help you do that, great. Do you have to go to court every day? No. And most lawyers do not go into court at all. In fact, it was a couple years at the law firm before I even knew where the courthouse was. So as a transactional attorney, so just know that when it comes to business, when it comes to finance, when it comes to dispute resolution, and yes, criminal justice, there is such an open field in spaces where we can use this education, and all of it can be used for the betterment of our communities when that is where our heart and our passions lie. And I will just end by saying, when you get to law school, do not let it change you. Let it empower what it is that you brought to law school in the first place. I've seen a lot of people who are about it. And then, you know, y'all know the opportunities come and you know, it is, and if you're not rooted in community, that was one thing, you know, even though I was at the law firm, nobody's listening, this is just between us. But I mean, I was making copies for my grassroots organizing. I was doing, you know, so I mean, like you have to stay grounded in the passions that drove you there in the first place. That's how you avoid ending up, you know, being some Joe Schmo or Susie Q at a space you don't really want to be with, people you don't really want to work with on issues you have no interest in, and ended up bored and burnt out, you know, 5-10 years later. So hopefully all of the rest of you will have something more positive to end on. I do have but I just thank all of you for allowing me to share this moment with you and for inviting me to participate, Nick.
Thank you so much, Lurie. We appreciate all of your work. We see you and we appreciate you. Really great comments. And I'll just add, this is no real shade, but to Lurie's point, yes, I do recall some classmates, you know, that I started with, you know, some of them calls me a decade later to say, oh, Nick, man, like you really did, you know, follow what makes you happy and your passion. And I followed the beaten path, so to speak. And I wish I had done the same. Well, one, you still can. And two, I think Lurie raises a good point. You don't have to follow the beaten path. You should, I would recommend, you know, if a degree is the right thing for you to do, also keep in mind what what happiness also means. You don't want to spend 5-10 years or more in the profession where you're not fulfilled and you're not happy. So that's a very interesting comment, but I want to see if anyone had anything to add to what Lurie said.
Well, I've used my law degree for so many different things in my life. You know, I'm approaching almost 60 years old now, and you know, in 30 years, for example, I started in the law firm scene, and I absolutely hated it. I was in a law firm of about 60 attorneys, and no one looked like me or was Latino or African American, no one. And I was very unhappy there. So I decided to open up a community-based law practice, and that's where I was happiest. You know, I did my pro bono stuff, helping people in housing court. So it helped me establish my own practice and my own freedoms to do things that I wanted to do. I've used it as a legislator. If you look at now at our housing reforms, our criminal justice reform, it is because of my experience in the courthouse that I was able to lend certain level of expertise to the New York State Senate when the leader put together a working group for housing and criminal justice reform. I've used it also as an adjunct college professor. I've taught constitutional law classes at a local college. So that helped me with that. And, I've used it in a multitude of different ways. Anytime anybody gets in trouble, I use it. So, the law is something that you can use for many things. I encourage everyone that can go through the process to go through it. There's a direct correlation between how higher of a level of education you receive and the amount of income that you receive, if that's important to you. There's no secret that, if you get a law degree or a medical degree, chances are that your overall income during your life is going to be higher. So it can help you also in that respect. It shouldn't be everything. Not everybody's concerned about being a multi-millionaire. I, for one, I like community service. I probably would have made a lot more money if I'd gone to the law firm scene or continue practicing law on a full-time basis. But that didn't fulfill me. My heart has always been on helping the community, in making life better for those that come after me, expanding the horizons to all of our communities of color. And that was more important to me than the paycheck. My children may feel differently. My wife may feel differently. And by the way, she's in law school now too. But certainly there's so many different things you can do with it that I encourage everyone that has the ability to go to law school and complete it and fight all these barriers to do so.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Senator. Ryan or Ariana?
Sure. I think I've only had my law degree for about 4 years, but I know that I've used it to give back to my community. And I think there's many things that I'm proud of to say that I use my law degree to assist or help out. But one particular case that stands out in mind was when I helped a 14-year-old boy from Honduras obtain legal status in the United States. It was a pro bono project that I worked on. And because I was an attorney and I was able to assist, I had that opportunity to make that impact on his life. Apart from that, I now tutor for the bar exam. So I assist my law school and we target certain students and I assist with tutoring for the bar exam. I recently was selected to tutor Black males at St. John's Law School from the Black Male Initiative and the Metropolitan Black Bar Association to tutor them on civil procedure and con law. So those are some, I guess, non-traditional ways in which I use my law degree to give back to others and provide that assistance that didn't necessarily exist for me when I was going to law school. In addition to that, I've gone back to my middle school, to other middle schools within my community here in Queens, to talk about what it is to be a lawyer, how to get there, the skills that you need. So I think those are just some ways that I've been able to give back.
And I guess to finish off, if you ask my family members, I'm already a lawyer. I have to constantly remind them that I am not, but I'll be here to service them in the future. But there are a lot of factors that you have to take into account when you decide what kind of law you want to practice in, but you have to be passionate about it. In my opinion, there's some satisfaction in knowing that I will use my legal skills to fight on behalf of marginalized clients who will otherwise have little hope of getting a fighting chance in our legal system. And this is where I do the shameless plug for CUNY Law. We're the #1 public interest law school in the nation. We have the #2 clinical programs in the nation. And I'm thankful that I'm able to get that experience, but you can go into law school thinking you want to do one thing, but explore different options. Just be passionate about it. There is a legal team at every single company you can think of, every nonprofit. So there's definitely a space out there for everybody. You just have to find what you truly enjoy.
Totally agree with that. And actually, Ryan, going back to a couple of your comments, you reminded me when you talked about the Black Male Initiative of St. John's, where I went to St. John's from St. John's University in Queens, and a really funny story talking about adjusting, as a Black man in the majority white law school and what comes along with it. This is a story of stop, question, and frisk. I was a 2L second year. And I was living in a home down the street from the campus with other law students, and I think so there's some undergrads as well. And another Black man and I walked out of the house to go to class. I think he was in the undergrad section. I was in the graduate section, the law section. We walked out the house, and it was on the one-way street. And we happened to see, we know what they look like, an undercover police car rolled down the street the wrong way and passed us. I think you know where I'm going with this. So the vehicle passes us, stops, reverses, stops in front of us, and two undercover detectives got out. And I immediately thought, oh, I think this is what they talk about when we talk about stop and frisk and racial profiling, and it was. So it came up and asked us, oh, do you all live in this house? Context, the house is in Donald Trump's neighborhood, Jamaica Estates. So that's a little context. Yes. And while I'm answering the question, the second detective frisks my friend. And so I'm like, all right, this may not go too well. So what can I do to prevent further harassment, further profiling, possible detainment, possible arrest? They say, oh, well, you two fit the description. Give me your ID. All right. So I hand the detective who's in front of me my state ID and my law school ID. I don't think he knew that I attached the law school ID. So my friend's getting frisked, and the detective is scanning my ID, and he feels that there's a card behind it, and he sees my law ID. And the second he saw that ID, he immediately said to his partner, "We got to go." And to which they went very quickly. And so you might guess what class I was headed to walking out of the house. Criminal procedure, the literal course where you learn about detainment and reasonable searches and seizures. And I thought that was the most ironic but eye-opening thing, particularly as a Black male law student. And that was, that's not a horror story. I mean, there's so many people who have even lost their lives to such interactions. But I think that one story reminds me that it's important to bring our full selves to the work, whatever it is, even if it's legal practice as I am in government or whatever your station is, because our stories matter. When we talk about reform and making life a little bit better for people of color, including those who are trying to go to law school, those identities are really, really critical. Racial profiling still exists. It's a huge problem. And I'm very happy to see a moment in an era now where I feel like there's critical mass to finally end some of this stuff. There's a new, not to get political here, but there's a new White House coming in. There's a new Attorney General in New York. There's so much that I think is moving in the right direction. And, with all of your help and assistance and dedication at the law department, at Medgar Evers and the state Senate, as a chief of staff, a future attorney, in the public advocate's office, I think it's up to all of us to help change these systems. So that's kind of how I want to end this conversation. If there's any questions on Facebook, Chanel will have to address a couple of them. But I leave this conversation with hope, and I open the floor to you three again, just to make any sort of closing remarks. And if there's any questions from Facebook, we'll take them. But I think this has been a really, really great conversation so far. So anybody want to make any closing remarks? Oh, Senator, you're muted.
Oh, my apologies. So we have to do more to change the trajectory of diversity in the legal profession in our state and our society. We have to hold the fire to the law firms that have the resources to go into our high schools and our middle schools and talk about the legal profession, setting up programs to recruit students of color into the profession, asking our judges, our prosecutors, our business people, all of them that practice law to make sure that you do everything you can to encourage people to become lawyers. I know many judges in the Bronx have internship programs that take in young students, and many of them want to go to law school or have a different mindset, but certainly the experience helped them get to where they ultimately wanted to get. So all of us have to work together to improve this. I certainly have continued to do that through legislation. One thing that they attempted to do this year was to merge the courts, and a court merger that didn't put communities of color into the room. They only had the bar associations of predominantly white firms, white shoe firms, but not a single bar of color was asked to participate in that merger. And so I worked with my colleagues in the Senate to kill that merger plan, and told the administrative judge that until you take our point of view into account, now suddenly you want to merge the courts and move our elected circuit court judges who reflect our counties. Now you want to have the ability to send them wherever you want. Well, that's not going to happen on our watch, unless they take into account all the bar associations of color, all the important bar associations, to make sure that we get a wide view of what we want with merger, because merger means it impacts diversity in the courts. I have no doubt about it. If you really want to become a member of the legal profession, don't let anything stop you, because you can do it. There are a lot of white shoe lawyers that I know that are not as capable as people that you guys sometimes call second tier or third tier law schools. I don't believe there's any tier. If you're able to survive law school and pass and become a lawyer, then there's no tier. You are the tier. And so don't let anything convince you otherwise. Thank you all. Please be safe. God bless you all. And now I have to go on another Zoom.
No problem. Thank you so much, Senator. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Ryan or Ariana, feel free to make it close.
Sure, I just want to say, oh, go ahead, Ariana.
No, go ahead, Ryan.
Okay, I just want to say thank you for asking me to be a part of this amazing panel. I think it was a great discussion, and it's one that's well needed and during these times. And I just echo everything that the senator had to say. I don't think there's anything more that I can add.
I guess from what we saw from the beginning from Senator Sepulveda up to my experience, not much has changed in the last 30 years with the law school process. So I think we need to create law school pipeline programs, focus on underrepresented students through SUNY and CUNY school. We can't expand diversity in the legal profession if we never get there. And if there was ever a time to apply to law school, this is it. There are so many people of diverse backgrounds that can and should bring their perspective to the profession. And I say this as a little Dominican girl from the Bronx who never knew any lawyers that looked like me. And I only got the idea from TV. And I'm letting you know that you can do it. There are going to be obstacles, but try to get past those obstacles and become a lawyer, because there's so many people that don't want you to do it.
This has been a great conversation, folks. And if there are questions for any of the panelists, feel free to get in touch with our office on Twitter at the Office of the Public Advocate, or I'm at Nick E. Smith, NYC on those platforms. But I think we've heard, folks either in law school or post-law school in their careers, well, actually in their careers and in law school in Ariana's case. But it's a reminder again that people of color have got to break through these barriers, and we can do it. You have great examples on this panel, so we're happy to connect you with any of the panelists, and we thank you all for watching. Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Ariana. And thanks to our team for setting this up. Have a great night, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Good night.